All right, howdy everybody. All right, so, hello Gabriel, nice to see you. And Anthony says he's gonna try to pop in here, I guess. How are you guys? It's been a whole month now. And, yeah. So I had an itchy finger. Can I do a classical intro? Yes, let's do a classical intro. A little fuzzy sound for classical, but I guess that's kind of close. Let's see here. We do have some questions. I just printed them. That said, let me make a few announcements quickly. I added to my list. In fact, where's my list? The whole purpose of this list is to be organized. And sometimes when you're more organized, you get lazy and end up being less organized. All right, so yes, so I didn't add it. Oh yes, announcements. So I got that. So I wanted to start these Q&As real quick with a couple of announcements. I tried to do that in the past, and the problem with that was that if we're doing them every week, there's not much to have announcements about, right? The big announcement we have for this time is that we are actually going to ITG Convention in San Antonio. We're actually going to have a booth. So if anyone is going to be in ITG in San Antonio for ITG, come by. We're going to have a booth in the Live Oak room. And when you go into the room, we'll be off to the right at the end. So anybody that's going to be at ITG, look us up and come visit. We would love to see you. That's basically what we're doing now. I was going to have an announcement about a gig on Mother's Day, but that got canceled because I won't get into that. Anyway, won't go into that. Anyway, so let's start with the first questions from before. This is from Karen. Karen says, I'm thinking about getting a second trumpet for backup and variety. Any ideas of where to look and how to evaluate them, new and used? I'm currently playing a Blessing XL from the 70s, which I believe is a good intermediate horn. Okay, you know what I really like? Hello, Karen. I just read your... Karen came in just when I was reading her question. Oh, you bought a new one. I'm too late. All right. Well, um, Karen says, hi, I just bought a new to me used trumpet and I'm having trouble with the third valve slide moving freely. Any suggestions? I may have to take it in to have it cleaned well and looked over. That's a good idea. I would strongly recommend having it cleaned. That problem would go away if you did that. Unless, okay, I shouldn't say that. I can't know for sure if there's no dents or whatever, but the way you said it, I'm having trouble with the third valve slide moving freely, which makes it sound like it's at least moving. And a lot of times that tends to be dirt. And when I say dirt, a lot of people think, oh, my horn's not dirty. Well, that's not what I mean by dirt. I mean, you know, um, what happens because it's metal moving on metal. My understanding is that microscopic shavings make their way into the area between the slides, and that can be a problem. That's what I mean by dirt. It's not dirt like what we know dirt, but there are particles that get stuck between the slides. That so anyway, it's not like saying somebody is dirty. A lot of people actually make that association, and it's not true. Um, all right, so well, I guess I kind of messed up with that. All right. Gabriel says, I have a question, Eddie. How can I take my throat well opened while playing? You know, the the teacher that taught me about that, by the way, I learn from everybody, even people who don't like me. And that teacher did not like me. It's the only teacher in my whole career that didn't get along with me. And I have to say it that way because I didn't have a problem with him. And in fact, when things went south, it was devastating to me. And devastating enough that I won't get into that, but yes, very, very devastating. But there were certain things that I learned from him, and that's one of the things that he taught is he would say that you should play as if you're yawning. So whatever you do, whatever that sensation is that you have when you yawn, that's where the throat should be. Now, I'm not so sure anymore that an open throat, I'm not so sure that we should ever have to think about that. I would much rather think about the sound and imitate what has to happen for the sound than to have my mind on those more pointed thoughts. Now, I don't mind doing experiments with stuff like the throat, and that's the way you would access that is with that yawning sensation. He would always call it a yawning sensation. Other people would talk about it in terms of, right, if you try to fog a window, and just there are things that you do that automatically open up the throat. You can experiment with stuff like that. I'm not a big fan of that kind of thought when we're actually doing trumpet playing. So when we're playing the exercises, when we're playing music, I'm not a big fan of thinking I need to open my throat. You know what happens? I hate to get sidetracked here like this, but it's a lot like what I've heard people say about the medical industry. um, the health industry, right? People, if you go to a surgeon with a certain problem, his answer is going to be to cut something out. If you go to a medicine guy, his answer is going to be to give you certain medicines. If you go to a what is it called, an oncologist or whatever they call him, his answer is going to be uh, to give you uh, what do you call it, chemo. And someone, when I mentioned this in a lesson the other day, the student said, yes, to the to the hammer, everything is a nail. Does that make sense? To the hammer, everything is a nail. The hammer wants to pound everything. And I think the reason I'm saying that, I think a lot of teachers teach that way. I think a lot of teachers say, well, your sound is this and this, or you're having trouble with that and that. This is what's wrong, and this is the solution. And a lot of times, stuff like open throat, using more air, uh, stuff like that, these arbitrary things are oftentimes told to us as if, you know, here's some authority figure. And always remember, I'm not an authority figure. I'm not trying to be an authority figure. We've talked about that before. I'm not trying to be an authority figure. Now, people love an authority figure. It makes their life, on the surface, it makes their life easier. Tell me what to do, I'll do it. So you go to the surgeon, and the surgeon says, let me cut that out. Right? Because to a hammer, everything is a nail. And so I don't want to be like that. I want to truly help people. I want, when someone has a problem on their trumpet, I want to help figure out what they can do to fix it. And that's not going to be true if and I'm not saying this, Gabriel, because I think that's what is happening here. I'm not saying that. Okay. You're just reminding me of this. Okay. Um, but yes, there are people who will just tell you, you have to open your throat. That's the problem with everything that you're doing, whatever it is that you're doing wrong. This is the answer. This is the panacea to all your problems. And that's not how real life works. And once again, I'm not saying that's what's happening here. Um, my question to you, Gabriel, would be, how do you know that your throat is too closed? That's my question. How do you know you need to open up your throat? Normally, and I guess that's why I'm going on this sidetrack. Normally, when people say this to me, Mr. Lewis, how do I open up my throat? It's because someone told them that their throat was too tight, too closed. And when it comes to stuff like that, I'm on board with the people who say, don't think about that, think about the music, and it will take care of itself. I'm not 100% in that camp, but there's a lot of stuff that does work that way, in my opinion. All right, Karen says, what do you use to oil the first and third slides? Do you use a valve guard? What are the pros and cons? Now, for my Bach, I don't have to have a valve guard because there's a something. Oh, maybe valve guard. What do you mean by valve guard? I think valve guard, isn't that the thing that keeps it from falling out? So you don't need that. Now, maybe valve guard is the plastic or the leather that goes around it. I'm not sure about that. The terminology, I don't know. So if you're talking about the thing that wraps around the valve casing, I don't use that. I had one in high school. I didn't like it. Some people have to have it because their hands are so acidic that I've had this trumpet since 97. Is it 97 or 99? I can't remember now. But well over 20 years. And I just have just a tiny bit of pitting right here. Just a tiny bit. So I really don't need, my hands are not that acidic. And this thing is in my hand all day. This thing is in my hand all day, so I don't really need to have that. The acidity in my fingers is not bad enough to worry about that. The rest of the horn will fall apart before I get to where that goes through. Now, if you want it to be pretty, so that's obviously not pretty. See, it does have some pitting. It's just not. After over 20 years, if that's all the pitting I'm getting when this is in my hand all day long, I don't think that's ever going to be a problem. So, what do I use for oil on the slides? I'll put slide grease first. Then I oil it. That way you get something a little bit, if you only oil it and don't use slide grease, then it's going to be less. I'm not. It's hard to describe how that works. It gets kind of gritty, I guess, would be one way to say it. Whereas if you grease it first and then put the valve oil on it, it gets very slippery, for lack of a better word. I hope that makes sense. So, Gabrielle says, playing higher notes above high C, my sound is less resonant. So I thought it's something with the throat. No, I wouldn't assume that. No. And making your throat more open for the high notes might actually have the opposite effect. It might actually make you have a more pinched sound. Why is that? Because the throat is, and I don't talk about this often because I don't like my students experimenting with the throat. I know that contradicts what I just said, but I wasn't talking about my students earlier. I don't want my students, the ones that are actually taking lessons with me, I don't want them to experiment with the throat as a source of resistance. But the throat is actually a source of resistance, and the sources of resistance have to balance each other. So if you take any of those sources and lower one of the sources, the other ones have to come up to compensate. If you have a nasal sound, a narrow sound, a tight sound in the upper register, a lot of times it's because those sources are out of balance. At least one, if not two, of your sources are too open. That's ironic, isn't it? If your sources are too open, it makes the other sources have to compensate. So I used to have a terrible, terrible pinched upper register. I'll try to imitate it now. It's hard for me to play like that anymore. What I'm doing is trying to keep my tongue down in my mouth. Well, tongue position is one of those sources of resistance. If you try to keep your tongue down on the high notes, you're going to force the other sources of resistance to tighten up, and that's going to give you a pinched sound. The way you get a full sound in the upper register is to have a balance of all the different um, uh, resistances. Now, part of what I'm doing there that sounds, that high G, it's there. Obviously, you can hear that it's there. But that's not the right mouthpiece to be playing that on. Here's the mouthpiece I've been playing lead on. Remember that the mouthpiece is one of those sources of resistance. And if the mouthpiece cup is too big for those notes, you're already starting off with an imbalance of resistance. And this is equivalent to a Bach 1. Not a 1C, a Bach 1. That's a bathtub mouthpiece. Now, same thing. That's a much bigger sound than this bigger mouthpiece. That's the point I want to make. You're going to have a bigger sound on a smaller mouthpiece because now all of the sources of resistance are balancing each other. If you're playing on a big bathtub like this, there's an imbalance and the other sources have to clamp down. Your tongue arch has to go extra high. Your teeth have to bite in a little bit harder. Your lips have to be firmer. Now, I practice on the big one so that I get that. Then when I put the lead mouthpiece on for that kind of gig, I feel like someone took the ankle weights off, right? So anyway, I hope that makes sense. Upper register, you might want to consider a more shallow mouthpiece. That's always a possibility. Now, why don't I play on the shallow mouthpiece all the time? Because I can't stand that sound. On the low register, I can't stand it. Actually, this new mouthpiece, I told you guys that I'm using the Warburton kit, right? On this new mouthpiece, this is the best lead mouthpiece I ever had. It's got a beautiful sound down in the lower register. It's not as tubby as the mouthpiece I've been playing on. Anyway, let me see what else we've got here. Anthony says, I'm doing a piece called God of Our Fathers for band we are going to play in church soon. Oh, very good. I had to use your method of starting slowly, and I think it's working. Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. Hello, Jeffrey. Nice to see you. Gabriel says, I play on a German rotary trumpet, and the mouthpiece is deep enough, and the backbore is large too. Yeah, so on a horn like that, if you're playing that kind of horn, and you're playing on a deep mouthpiece, yes, you're right. If you use a shallow mouthpiece on a German trumpet, the sound is horrible. Now, who says it has to be shallow though? If you go from a deep V cup, now it depends on what you're playing. If you're playing something that has to cover the full range, that's a little tricky. But if you're playing something like the lowest note is C in the staff, there's nothing wrong with having a C cup, not a shallow cup. I'm not saying a shallow cup. There's nothing wrong with having a C cup or something just a little bit smaller. Of course, I don't play on any of those German trumpets. I don't have access to that, so I think they sound lovely. You know, I heard back when IAJE was still, I think it was I went to a convention in Washington, D.C., I think it was, and I heard Claudio Roditi, playing on one of those. And it was awesome. I heard him live. It was awesome, awesome, awesome. So, yeah. So let me Gabriel says, can I use a smaller end diameter but with a B cup? That depends on you. I can't do that because of my teeth. I can't change diameters. And there's a lot of people that cannot change diameters. But it's a very personal thing. I know other people that can just, no matter what mouthpiece it is, they can make it work. My teeth won't let me do that. All right, so Anthony is here, but Anthony did ask a question on the website. He says, Eddie, for the next Q&A, I want to know more about Chikwitz flow studies, how to do them correctly, and any other information on him. I liked him when he played harp with the Marx brothers. Well, I don't know about that last part. So I'm not an authority on the Chikwitz flow studies, and I would strongly recommend buying the book that his son published. I don't have it. It's on my to-do list to get a copy. But it's something I think we should all have because it's got interviews and stuff like that, Q&As from people that worked with Chikwitz. That said, I do have the way that I do it. So I want to make sure that's how this is perceived. I'm not an authority on Chikwitz exercises. That doesn't mean I don't have experience with it. Now, the first thing I want to say is that with Chikwitz, those Chikwitz exercises are the root, the foundation of my long tones in all of my books. Every long tone study I have was derived from the Chikwitz studies. Every long tone study comes from the Chikwitz. I started modifying them in the early 90s. And when I published the first book, the Daily Routines book, I made up my own studies because I thought that the Chikwitz stuff would be under copyright. And I wanted to find some way to not have to deal with that. I know there's ways to do it legally, but yes, the reason why, so when I first started my method, I was doing the Chikwitz flow studies. And when I replaced them with my own original stuff, I tried to stay as close to the flow studies as possible. So what I'm going to answer for your question is how I would do those flow studies. First of all, now remember, I'm not saying that this is how they should be done. I'm saying this is how I do them. So first thing that I do that's different is I put a lip bend on that first note. Right? I'm doing the F sharp as a lip bend. Now, that's how I do it. Let me describe the details of what I just did. One thing that I'm striving for on this, once again, this is not how it's done. This is how I do it and how I teach my students. If people have a problem with the way I'm doing this, I don't care. I'm not part of that trumpet tradition. I'm kind of separated from it academically. Okay, I have used this method. and modified it for my own purposes so it works with my system. Okay, so what I'm striving for is exactly the same air from the beginning to the end. I'm not phrasing it. I'm trying to make it sound pretty. I'm not using vibrato. I'm not using dynamics. I want something that almost sounds entirely mechanical. And what I just did is an example of that. I want the same air pressure throughout. That to me is the challenge of playing those studies. If other people see it a different way, that's their way. I have my way. So that's how I teach it. That's how I teach it. I want to have completely consistent air from the beginning to the end. Now, talking about the procedure. Oh, and by the way, see how long I made it? That's another aspect. I want to use most of my breath. It's a long tone study to me. It's not a flow study. The flow, to me, everything in my routine is a flow study. The whole book is a flow study. So in my system, the entire book is a flow study. Okay? So, now let's talk about the procedure, because the way it's done traditionally is that you now do that down in half steps. Okay? But, the slow version, right? That's not how I do it. I do what I call an expansion version of these Chickwick studies. So the second one I do is going to be the second. So I'm down a half step, but it's the second set. Now notice on that last note, the last note popped out a little bit too hard. I'm trying to avoid that. I don't want, so when I say steady air all the way through, if I were to look at it on a recording with Wave software, I should not see anything popping out. And in that case, I got to the last note and it popped. I don't want any popping. Okay? The next one I do. Now it's a little hard for me to do this over the desk. I'm sitting down today. I don't know if you guys noticed. And with this trumpet, I can't put it where it's natural for me over the desk. Otherwise, I'll pop myself in the face. So yes, as I go down, the notes go up. The highest note goes up. I actually have this written down somewhere. If you guys remind me, I'll try to put it up on the website, and you can download that. Okay. So in answer to your question, that's how I do the Chikwitz studies. I rarely do them anymore because what I do instead is my exercises, which are based on the Chikwitz exercises. It's just different notes. It's the same exercise, but I'm doing different notes. Let me see if I can pull up one to give you an example. So here's an example of one of the new ones, unpublished right now. This is going to be from the Trumpet Chops Master. I'm actually very excited about this, really. This is not this. Oh, I don't have them numbered yet. I don't know what number this is. Unpublished, I'll show you what it looks like. Okay. The red pens are, the red ink is edits. Okay. Let's see. I'll do the one at the top of the page. Anyway, I shouldn't have done that without warming up. Anyway, so that kind of fell apart at the end, but you get the idea. This is all, it's an elaboration of the Chikwitz exercise. And so that's why I don't do the Chikwitz stuff anymore, is because I've got my own based on Chikwitz, okay? I also have a couple other questions. You guys be patient with me while I do this. Someone asked, well, didn't ask, but there was a comment. Someone said, you have an interesting accent. Now, my accent comes from living all over the world, literally. So I just wanted to put that in there. Someone did mention the accent. My dad was military. I grew up on the East Coast, up in Maryland, Pennsylvania, those areas, New Jersey. I lived in Hawaii. By the end of my 2 years in Hawaii, I started sounding like a local, saying "Hey, bro" and stuff like that. I forgot there's a word for that, how they speak over there. But 2 years over there, I was starting to talk like that. Then we moved to El Paso, and I lived in El Paso for like 9 years, and that accent rubbed off on me. I think when I'm not having an accent. Oh, and then now I live in the South, right? I've been living in the South for like 30 years. We do consider Houston part of the South. And so I've got a really mixed up accent. I think probably the root of my accent is Western Pennsylvania. That was my dad's hometown, and that's my accent. And then all these other things are layered over the top of that. So, anyway, and then one more thing. Someone asked on the Lip Buzz page, Eddie, is it possible that some people just cannot play trumpet? And then he has more that he goes into his specifics. For example, he says that he's been practicing every day for half an hour or even an hour sometimes, but it's not working for him. Let me answer that question first by saying, yes, it's possible that some people just cannot play trumpet. It's just not very probable. It's not likely that someone, I mean, maybe 1 out of, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 people could not possibly play the trumpet. What's more likely? This is someone I'm named Simon. What's most likely for Simon is that he's probably playing. Let's reword this. Let's word it this way. If Simon was my student, the very first thing we would do with him is put him on the biggest mouthpiece I can find. Not because the big mouthpiece is the right mouthpiece for him, but because a lot of the stuff that he's talking about here, he says, I can sometimes make an actual tone So he's not even most of the time, not even getting a tone out of the horn. But it's the wrong note. When I encounter that in the lessons, I usually move them to a huge mouthpiece because it's easier to get their lips into the mouthpiece and get something done. And then we move from there. That doesn't mean that's the right mouthpiece for them, but a lot of times if the mouthpiece is too small, you just can't get your lips to do what needs to be done. It's like something's pinching lips. I had this recently with a student, a beginner student, and he could not get his low notes to come out at all. And when you're a beginner, that's almost all you've got is low notes. So if the low notes won't come out because of your mouthpiece and you only have chops to play low notes, it's a sad situation. So yes, in my lessons, we put the students on as big of a mouthpiece as possible so that they can find their way. And then as they progress, we can bring the size down a little bit. So if all you have access to is the box sizes, we would go with the biggest box you can get. A 1, I think they have something that's a little bigger than a 1 now that they didn't have before. But yes, we want to get in the biggest mouthpiece you can. And now that's not necessarily the answer. What I can say with someone struggling like that, if you keep trying and you're practicing regularly, if that's not working, then what you have to do in your practice time is spend that time experimenting. Don't spend that time pounding your head against the wall doing the same thing over and over again. Spend that time experimenting. Try different stuff. If you keep trying the same thing over and over again, you're not going to find what's wrong and nothing's going to change. So you experiment. You know, people at this point will often say, you need to find a teacher. And that's okay because the teacher can help you through that experimental process. But there's also teachers out there that will just say to you that you're doing it wrong and that you should just do it this way. And that's not helpful a lot of times. A lot of times that's not helpful because if you already know you're doing it wrong because of the note's not coming out. So, and most people that on YouTube that leave comments like this have already watched all those videos. They've already heard someone say, do this and do that. That the right way to do it is this way and the right way to do it is that way. They've already been exposed to all that. And it's still not working. Well, because that's not how this works. It has to be experimental. My first experiment I would do with you is to start try using a bigger mouthpiece. And in fact, if you have access to a cheap trombone mouthpiece, I've done that before with some of the students. Get them to buzz in a trombone mouthpiece just to get started. Just to get started. Okay? All right. All right, Karen says, my double buzzing problem has decreased a lot, but still happens sometimes. Any tips? Exercises sounds bad. So, last time we talked about this, because you did bring it up, and we talked about appropriate resting. And I still think that's the right way to approach that. You know, there are some things that can be considered double buzz. If you would like, you could send me like on your phone, take a recording. You can do video too if you want, but send it to me. Maybe through you have my email now. You send it to my email. And I can sometimes tell what's going on by listening to it. But I still, my answer, without having more information from you, and what I mean by information, hearing what you sound like, I can't change my answer on that because that's the answer I always give, is that it's a resting issue. And normally the resting that we're talking about is having the instrument on your lips for too long. You wanna rest as long as you play. Gabrielle says, what is the double buzzing? Double buzz is when you get that growly noise. It's people think that it's because one lip is vibrating at a different frequency from another lip, or from the other lip. I'm not so sure that's what it is. Doesn't matter what it is. To me, I don't need to have scientific evidence that that's what it is. It doesn't matter to me because the answer that I've always seen work is to make sure you're resting enough. And that resting has to be at all three levels. So you guys have seen the 3 levels of rest video. I think most of you have seen that. If you're not following that, you will have issues with double buzz. Now, like I said, Karen, if you can send me a recording of it when it's happening, and I know that's hard to do because you don't know when it's going to happen. But if you notice one day that it's happening, make a quick recording and send it to me, and I'll try to give you a little bit better advice than just that. All right, Anthony says, Eddie, do you think Chikwitz flow studies are good to practice? Well, absolutely. Oh, I skipped Gabriel. Is Clark a flow study too? Yes. Well, if you're talking about Clark technical studies, my understanding from the original Chickwitz book, which I do have, my understanding is that Clark is the one that invented the flow studies, the flow study concept. Chikwitz said in the original flow study book, he said he quotes Herbert L. Clark as talking about moving long tones. Moving long tones are flow studies. Moving long tones are flow studies. So yes, in a sense, Clark invented this. Now I have seen since then people debating that, and I'm not interested in that debate. I don't think we need to talk down trumpet lore. If the trumpet lore works, it's good whether it's true or not. I know that sounds very strange. Anyway, Anthony says, do you think Chikwitz flow studies are good to practice? Of course they're good. Like I said, all of my physical books are rooted in the flow study concept. And if you don't have my books, you can't go wrong with Chickwick. Hello, Sean. There's Sean. Sean says, I read and learned about the steady air in your physical trumpet pyramid book. It was an eye opener. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. Anthony says, thank you, Eddie, for Chickwitz. You're welcome. Karen says, thank you. You're welcome. Gabrielle says, I can't understand how this double buzzing would sound. Karen says, consider yourself fortunate. Amen. It's a growling, buzzing tone. And she's absolutely right. Yeah. It's a growling, buzzing tone. So, anyway, what other questions do we have today? Let me double check that nothing's come up on the website. Okay. Any other questions? So there was something I didn't say about Chikwitz that I wanted to say. Oh, can you make an example of this strange buzz piece? I can't turn that on. I don't know how anyone would do that. I wish I could. Let's see. Let's check the online and see if there's a. There's a lot of answers about how to double buzz here, or how to fix double buzz, but I'm not finding any recordings of it. Yeah, I'm not finding any recordings of it. So yeah, I can't make it happen. That's usually um usually when we get a double buzz, it's no, that's not what I was going to say. Usually when I fix something, I can make it. I do that thing on purpose so that I can figure out how to fix it. That's not something I've been able to copy. I have in the past had double buzz. I have had that. Not very often. I think when you practice my system, the double buzz is extremely rare. When you do all the stuff the way that I teach it, it just doesn't happen all that much. Karen says, my dad bought me a used Yamaha 8310Z. Any tips to understand and play it? Um, yeah, I don't know. That's a very nice horn. I think I'm not entirely familiar with oh, she says that it sounds like a little spit is in the horn. Now, you said that it hasn't been cleaned professionally. I wouldn't worry about that until you get it cleaned. About the sounding like there's spit in there. If I would strongly recommend going to get a professional cleaning if you're having that too and the slide. I would very much recommend getting a professional cleaning. Sean says, do trumpet players make the very airy sound on purpose for effect? If so, how is it done? I've listened to Chet Baker, I think, and for sure Tom Hill. Um, so that is on purpose. The way I see it is the closer you are to the microphone, the more it's going to sound like that. It's not so much a fuzzy sound as it is a mic technique. Yes, there is some fuzz in the sound, but I've worked with great orchestra players, and even the great orchestra players have, if you stand right next to them, they have fuzz in their sound too. It just doesn't project across the room. You have to be right there to hear it. Now, if the microphone is right there in your bill, you're gonna pick up all that fuzz. By the way, I got poison ivy. That's what all this stuff is. So if you're thinking I've got like some disease or something, that's not it. I cleaned out some poison ivy from the side of the house and wasn't as careful as I should be. So I hope that doesn't gross you guys out. Karen says, talking about double buzz, spit in the horn sound. Yep. So I would strongly recommend getting it getting it clean like that. So Gabriel says it's a medium bore trumpet, so it makes more resistance. Yeah, more resistance, to be clear, more resistance than a large bore, right? All right. What other questions? So if any of you have questions that I didn't quite answer correctly or answer fully enough, just let me know that you need more uh, what do you call it? Clarity or whatever. Yeah. Sean says, thank you. Sorry about the poison ivy. No, it's all right. Not that big of a deal. It just looks bad, right? It could be a lot worse. And I'm almost over it already. That's why I'm wearing a long shirt right now, because I don't want to. This part right here is the worst of it. Oof. And I don't want to be scratching on it. Any other questions? I was expecting to go longer today because of the taking a whole month, but it looks like people didn't really send in as many questions as I had anticipated. I want to remind you guys that since I'll be at the convention a month from now, we will probably have the Q and A, but I'll probably be doing it from our booth at the exhibit. We'll see how that works. That's the plan for now, that we will have this Q and A on the 4th. I think it's the 4th, or is it the 3rd? Let me look. The next one will be June. I think it's the 3rd. Oh no, yes, the 3rd. We will have the next one on the 3rd, and it will probably be live from the convention. So ITG is May 31st to June 4th. Gabriel says, what is an acceptable high register for classical? Well, that really depends on whether you want to be a what do you call it, soloist, or a ensemble player. So as a soloist, if you want to be like a successful soloist, like someone that plays all of the repertoire, then you should have up to G above the C, above C, high C, because there's a lot of stuff that has now a lot of it would be on piccolo trumpet, but there's a lot of stuff that has on piccolo trumpet that high D and for a D trumpet part, which ends up being a high F for us. F or F sharp. No, actually it's an E. I'm trying to think with the transposition. It ends up being a concert D, the equivalent of an E on a B flat trumpet. And so yes, there's a bunch of Baroque things that we can play. If you're looking more for ensemble stuff, high C, high D, high E, that's plenty, depending on the ensemble that you're doing. Now, if you have to do like Scriabin and stuff like that, I think there are high notes in that. But for being in an ensemble, I don't think there's a lot of really high notes going on. So yes, generally speaking, above high C, probably not past the G above that. All right. One of my favorite piccolo piece is the Fash. I love that piece. Haven't been able to play it in public yet, but I love it. Actually, all that classical repertoire is getting unused, and it's a shame too because I really like that stuff. But if there's no opportunity to play it, what do? There's really nothing you can do about it. So, what else? What do you guys have? What questions? I love that answer from Karen. Consider yourself fortunate. I love that. Yeah, we're putting a lot of effort into this, getting ready for the convention. Um, we want it to be, professional. It's gonna be Tiger Music. We're not doing it under my name, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to mention it here because when people get there, I don't want them looking for my name. They need to look for Tiger Music because that's what we're advertising. All right. Well, if we don't have more questions, I guess we'll shut it down. Like I said, next time we'll probably be live from the convention. Gabriel says, I've never heard of that double buzz. I'm sorry for Karen, but I really don't know what it was. Yeah. All right. Well, guys, I'll give you a couple more seconds before I shut it down. I was expecting to go longer, but if we don't have questions, I don't want to just sit here like twiddling my fingers. Um, so your double buzz is worse at band practice. That's very, very interesting. I'm gonna have to think about that for a while. Do you play louder? Hey, there's Leonard. Nice to see you, Leonard. Do you play louder in band? That's something to go on right there. That's the kind of information that I'm talking about. Do you play louder in band? That's a good way to look at diagnosing what might be causing it. That's true. That's right. She says maybe I do can't rest as easily in practice, right? So when you are in band, you have a responsibility to play when you're supposed to play. So let me ask you this now, Karen. Does it happen from the beginning of the practice, or is it something that happens as you get tired towards the end of the practice? Now we're getting somewhere. Because that's two different things, right? If it happens only after you get tired, that's not the same thing as if here I am in band and it's just happening more often in band. That's not the same thing. Oh, there's more information now. Probably when I'm more tired or try to fade out loud to soft. Yeah, now we're getting something. This is at least something that I can think about and get back with you with more ideas. There's an exercise that I just wrote out for one of my students that works with the dynamics. Now, we do not do dynamics in my routine. We don't do dynamics in the routine, okay? Everything in the routine should be the same volume all the way through, mezzo forte, all the way through. So when I gave this student the dynamics, I called it dynamic spider exercise. It's based on something that I learned from a flautist in El Paso, um, a flute teacher out there, and um, Anthony said, "Eddie, it's nice seeing you. I want picture of the Arbenz book." So anyway, there's this exercise that I have that I wrote for my student, and I think if you practice this exercise, it might help you with what you're talking about. So send me an email, and I'll try to put a PDF in an email for you with that exercise in it, and we'll see if that helps. Gabrielle says, Eddie, when I play lip slurs from Chops Pro, shall I use the metronome? No, sir, don't do that. Play it in free rhythm. We don't want to, there's nothing in any of my routine books that should ever have a metronome on it. No metronome, no metronome on the long tones, no metronome on the scales, no metronome on the articulation studies. You should always be free to slow down when it gets more challenging and speed up when it's not challenging at all. This is the opposite of what we would normally do in practicing music. There are reasons why we do it this way in the routine. But no, we do not use um, the metronome on the routine at all. Anthony says, one day I want my picture in Arben's book. Oh my. So that's actually a good question, Gabriel, because a lot of people don't, there's so many of those things that nobody's going to know unless they ask about the routines, right? The routines should be very rubato all the way through. All the way through, from the beginning to the end, rubato. You milk the notes that need to be milked. That's a term that my teacher in college taught me. Milk the notes that need to be milked and move on from the notes that do not. All right. What other questions? So Leonard, um, so Gabriel says, I have some issues when I play a 9/8 piece. Is it useful to set metronome on subdivisions? I think you can do that at first. I would, as soon as possible, get away from that. But if you're having trouble with, well, let's put it this way: if the nature of your problem is that is with subdivisions, then yes, I think you should do that. I'm not a big fan of using those kind of metronomes. I think they take the responsibility away from the student, and but that doesn't mean we can't use that tool as a model. So like they have that Dr. Beat where right? You have that. Um, and you know, instead of, let's put it this way. I would much rather just put that if you have that kind of metronome, I would much rather just put that on and listen to it. I know that sounds funny. I would just rather listen to that for a while than to try to play with that. I would rather, for when I'm playing with a metronome, I would just rather have the beat and I'll make the meter. I hope that makes sense. I just want to have a beat so that I can make the meter. I'll do the subdivision. I'll do the strong beats and the weak beats. But as a learning tool, those fancy metronomes are wonderful. And yes, I've done that before. I don't have a metronome like that right now, but I've done that before where you, I think it's called Dr. Beat, and you can set all that stuff. And I've sat there and just listened to it. And you can listen to it fast, you can listen to it slow, and you just absorb what that sounds like. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. Trying to play along with that, I don't think is as useful. I know a lot of people do that, but I think it takes that responsibility away from you, and we want to make sure that it's you doing the meter, not the machine. And is this an issue? One of my biggest complaints when I'm listening to students today is that there's no meter whatsoever. And how much of that is because the meter has been taken away from them and put into a box? So yes, I think it's good to listen to the metronome like that. I think it's good to set the metronome and practice 9/8 with the metronome, but not with the subdivisions. Anthony says, thank you for your time, Eddie. Nice seeing you again. You're welcome. Nice to see you guys. Wow, very good. All right, so always nice to see you guys. Always good to hang out. Like I said, next one will be on the 3rd, June 3rd, and we will be live in San Antonio. We'll try to make that work. Okay. All right. Well, very good. Nice hanging out with you guys, and we'll see you next time. Have a great weekend. God bless you, and see you next time. Bye.